Jesus resurrected. Like, there's something different that goes on there.
There is a version of the resurrection story that they lied about, and the moment you hear it, you will understand exactly why it was forcefully hidden. Someone fed Grok AI one simple question about what happened during the 3 days Jesus was dead. What it found will shake you to your core. Warnings Jesus delivered after rising from the dead, that powerful hands ripped out of history before the world could ever reach them. And a final prophecy so dangerous that the people who found it made absolutely certain it would never reach you. The Western Bible has 66 books. The Ethiopian Bible has 88. 22 books were stripped from the version the world was handed. So, what is locked inside those missing books? This is the part of Jesus' resurrection that nobody has ever told you. And there are people who have spent centuries making sure it stayed that way. What Grok found inside the tomb. Grok immediately got to work. It tore through the Ethiopian manuscripts, document after document, text after text, and the very first thing it surfaced about the resurrection was something that exists in no Western Bible. The resurrection did not begin at dawn on Sunday morning, the way every painting, every sermon, every church service has always told you. It began 3 days earlier, inside a sealed tomb, in the dark. And what happened inside that darkness during those 3 days is where this story actually starts. The Ethiopian manuscripts do not describe the resurrection the way Western Christianity does. Western Christianity gives you a sunrise moment, a stone rolled away, an empty tomb, a folded cloth. The Ethiopian texts give you something else entirely. They describe a war, a full 3-day spiritual confrontation between Jesus' divine nature and the forces holding the realm of the dead locked shut from the inside. He did not simply wake up and walk out. He fought his way out. The earth cracked around the tomb the moment he broke through. The guards stationed outside did not merely faint from shock, as we were told. Several of them died from what they witnessed. Not one word of this appears in any Western Bible. Now, here is where the Ethiopian account does something that stops you cold. Before anyone found the empty tomb, before the women arrived with their spices, before any disciple was woken and told, the risen Jesus stood alone outside the sealed tomb in the dark before dawn, and he wept. Not from pain, not from relief. The Ethiopian monks who preserved this passage were meticulous about what they recorded, and they recorded this clearly. He wept for what he had seen on the other side of death, for what he had witnessed during those 3 days in the realm of the dead that he could not undo and could not bring back with him. The monks who copied this passage marked it as the most devastating single moment in the entire resurrection account. Not the crucifixion, not the moment of death. Then it gets even stranger. The Ethiopian Book of the Covenant describes the risen Jesus appearing to his disciples, with his wounds still raw, not healed, not sealed over, still open. The holes in his hands, the gash in his side, preserved exactly as they were at the moment of death. He chose this. The monks described it not as a failure of the resurrection, but as its most deliberate statement. He absorbed everything human power could do to him and rose anyway. And he wanted the evidence of that visible on his body forever. When Thomas reached out and touched those wounds, he was not touching a comforting miracle. He was touching the proof that the most brutal thing this world could do had not been enough. The Western accounts describe the disciples receiving the news of the resurrection with wonder and joy. The Ethiopian texts are far more honest about what actually happened in those first moments. The disciples who saw the risen Jesus were paralyzed. Several ran. One disciple, unnamed in any Western scripture, collapsed completely and had to be physically revived. The resurrection appearance was not comforting in those first moments. It was an encounter with something that had passed through death and returned as something the human mind was simply not built to absorb without breaking. These were people who had watched their teacher die, who had seen the body wrapped and placed in the tomb, and eating fish, showing them open wounds, and looking at them with eyes that had seen the other side of everything. And then there is the detail that the Ethiopian tradition has preserved with the most consistent, deliberate care. Before Mary Magdalene, before Peter, before the disciples who had given up everything to follow him, the first person the risen Jesus sought out was his mother, in private, before dawn. The Ethiopian manuscripts, texts that Rome never touched, are clear on this point. What, between them, was never recorded. The monks who copied this passage across centuries treated it with a reverence unlike anything else in the manuscripts. Even they did not write down what was said. They only recorded that it happened, and that she wept for a long time afterward. Whatever a son who had just broken through the locked door of death said to his mother in the dark before anyone else knew he was alive, it was not something the monks felt it was their right to put into words. What Jesus saw on the other side of death. For 3 days, Jesus was dead. Western Christianity skips over this almost entirely. The story moves from burial to empty tomb, as if nothing happened in between, as if those 3 days were simply blank. The Ethiopian texts do not skip them, they go inside them. They record what Jesus told his disciples about those 3 days during the 40 days he spent with them after the resurrection. And what he described is the version of the afterlife that Rome decided was far too dangerous for ordinary people to hear. Hell, according to what Jesus saw and described, is not fire. It is not physical torture. It is not the dramatic landscape of flames and screaming that Rome used for centuries to terrify people into obedience. What Jesus described to his disciples was something far worse than fire, because fire can be survived, and fire eventually ends. He described an eternal frozen stillness, souls completely unable to move, unable to speak, fully aware, with perfect and total clarity of every single moment they had wasted during their lives, every person they had failed, every choice they had made from fear or greed or pride, watching the living world continue without them, unable to change a single thing. He said the worst suffering was not pain, it was understanding, total, complete, irreversible understanding arriving too late, with no ability to act on it. Think about that for a moment. The capacity to see everything clearly, to understand exactly what mattered and what did not, to know precisely who you should have been, arriving in full only after the last chance to be that person is gone forever. This is the description of hell that Rome replaced with fire and brimstone. Perfect clarity arriving too late is harder to paint on a cathedral wall, but it is far more terrifying to anyone willing to sit with it honestly. Rome understood that a population afraid of physical flames can be managed. A population that understands the real cost of wasted time and ignored conscience cannot be controlled in the same way. The Ethiopian texts state that when Jesus emerged from the tomb, he came out carrying the full weight of every soul he had witnessed in the realm of the dead. He knew what they had lost. He knew the specific moments where each one had chosen wrongly. He knew the precise point where the divine spark inside each of them had gone dim. And the grief of that knowledge is why he stood alone and wept before dawn. He had seen the full cost of everything he had spent 3 years warning people about, not as a theological concept, name by name, soul by soul. Now here's the detail that has disturbed every scholar who has encountered it in the Ethiopian apocryphal tradition. Jesus encountered Judas after the resurrection, not in the physical world, because Judas was already dead by then. The meeting took place in the realm between the living and the dead. What passed between them survives only in fragments. The monks who copied this passage treated it with a caution unlike anything else in the manuscripts, as if they themselves were frightened of what they were transcribing. What remains suggests that Jesus did not go to condemn Judas. He went to complete something the betrayal had broken and left open. What that something was, the manuscripts do not say. The monks marked the incomplete account with a single notation. They wrote that it